Greetings YouTube, Remarkable Republican here once again to bring you the truth with a truth-flavored bias. Today we're continuing my series on looking at the best 10 movies out of every decade, so we're going to move on to look at the 1990s. This is another great decade for filmmaking, and now we're well removed from the old sweat fest of the 70s and all of the boring bullshit of supposed golden age Hollywood. This is where we have some really great movies. And one thing I really love about the 90s is that movies were so creative during this time. There are a whole lot of things that no one would have dreamed of trying in the past. That being said, none of these movies are fully mastered the way that later movies were mastered, because a lot of what they do is so experimental that you can't really have too many refined products during the 90s. But the creativity is still awesome. So let's take a look at the best movies from the 1990s. Before we do that, of course, we will have our honorable mentions, and I would also like to reiterate my objective criteria for determining which movies are the best movies. My objective criteria are quality. This is something that has an undeniable feel that you know. The message has to be good or relevant or funny or something along those lines. It has to all fit together. The movie has to fit its own time. It has to be something that really defines what 90s movies were, and it has to be still good and still relevant. So, without any further ado, let's go in and look at the honorable mentions for the 1990s. The 1990s honorable mentions will not include Jurassic Park. I put it on here because I'm sure that if I didn't put it on here, someone would ask, hey, where's Jurassic Park? Jurassic Park sucked. Now, I loved it as a kid, but watching it now, it is an objectively shit movie. If you want to watch a good movie about dinosaurs, watch Jurassic World or Jurassic World 2. Those are what Jurassic Park and Jurassic Park's immediate sequel, The Lost World, should have been and failed to be. If you lived in the 90s, that was a good movie, but today it is garbage. So, actual honorable mentions. Movies that have held up and withstood the test of time. RoboCop 3. Low budget, but extremely well written. Escape from LA. The effects may not be all that great, but the movie itself is vastly better than Escape from New York. The story is much better told, the jokes land a lot harder, and it is really good. Probably Kurt Russell's best performance. Fight Club. Y'all know about that one. Tyler Durden, the soap, all that. Good stuff. Batman Returns. Danny DeVito as the Penguin, and Michelle Pfeiffer as a very hot Catwoman. Can't go wrong. Batman Forever. Jim Carrey was hilarious in this one. Batman and Robin. This is another great one with a really off-key sense of humor. Arnold Schwarzenegger is pretty great in it as Mr. Freeze. Predator 2. This is an even better Predator movie than the original. And this one's set in LA. Really good. Something I'd recommend. There are some people who try to claim that it's not good, but they're fucking dumb. Forrest Gump. Not my style of movie, but still a good movie. Space Jam. Michael Jordan plays against the Looney Tunes and some other monsters. Need I say more? Of course, it's awesome. Army of Darkness. This is a movie with Bruce Campbell where he fights the supernatural. I don't really understand this movie, to be perfectly honest, but it is pretty good and the jokes are pretty funny. Every time I watch it, I appreciate it a bit more. Maybe there's more here than meets the eye, but I can't make it top 10 just because it is not one you can understand on the first 2 or 3 viewings. It's one you'd have to watch several times to truly understand. Home Alone, the original, Christmas classic, but it could have been a little better. Clerks, it is about working retail and the things you can get into while working retail. This is something that I don't think anyone before the 90s would have dared to make, but then they did it, and it ended up working out way better than anyone could reasonably expect. They also filmed it in black and white, which was a weird decision. The Matrix, this is basically a movie about philosophy. It is also really hard to understand, but there are parts of it that do make sense, and what's there is good. It just needed to be a little clearer. Halloween H2O, the best Halloween movie, bar none. The original sucked. Scream. This was a new horror film series. This was the best one of the lot. This was one of the scariest movies I've ever seen personally, and it really made me a horror fan. The Blair Witch Project. This was an indie horror film which worked really, really well and just involved a few kids in the woods with a camcorder. A lot of people have tried to capture this formula since, and all of them have fallen short of the original. That being said, for a movie to truly be great, it needs to have some production values. Sorry, guys. Pretty Woman, one of Julia Roberts and Richard Gere's best movies. It's a bit of a chick flick, but it does have some objectively good qualities. It's not one I'd watch in my spare time, but I have been forced to watch it, and I do have to admit that it is good. Pulp Fiction, not my cup of tea, but objectively not a bad movie. G.I. Jane, another good movie. Again, pretty weird and out there. It's about female soldiers. The 90s is the first time that women were allowed to serve, and it was uncomfortable for a lot of people. And this movie kind of explores that to some extent. It's a little liberal for my taste, but it does a good job, and it really fits the 90s to a T. The Wedding Singer, one of Adam Sandler's better movies. This one is funny. Happy Gilmore, an even better Adam Sandler movie that is about golf. This is when golf was becoming really popular on TV, so this really fits the 90s really well. The Waterboy, this was Adam Sandler in his more modern form. This is very late 90s, and it also is Adam Sandler doing football. All the jokes there really work, but it's way over the top. So, good movie. American Psycho, if you haven't seen it, you should. Alien Resurrection, the only truly great movie in the Alien franchise. This one has a plausible bad guy, the government, rather than the corporation. The original Alien movies are basically just Marxist propaganda. This one is an actual movie that's science fiction. Tomorrow Never Dies, the best of the Bond films of the 90s, and Pierce Brosnan's second Bond film. Then there's the third Bond film, Die Another Day, which is also good, although not quite as good as Tomorrow Never Dies. As for GoldenEye 007, that movie sucks. There are people who defend it, but I think that they are only remembering the game that this movie was based on, and not the movie itself. The movie itself sucks. There is Austin Powers, one of the better comedies of the 90s. 90s had a lot of great comedy. Austin Powers was good. It was basically a big spoof of earlier movies, and it works pretty well at the time. It hasn't aged super well, but it's aged enough that you can still figure out why it's funny. The Mummy, this was the only time Brendan Fraser was remotely good in a movie. Cube, this was a sci-fi original film back when they actually made those and they didn't suck. This one is really imaginative and mind-bending. It is just as deep and philosophical as The Matrix, but probably more coherent. The Lion King, Disney classic, really good. Aladdin, Disney classic, extraordinarily good. Mulan, Disney classic, really good. Anastasia, Disney classic, really good. Toy Story, Disney classic, really good. All of those have a lot of objective qualities in their favor, and all of them fall just short of the top 10. Last but not least, there is the war epic Saving Private Ryan, which forever changed the standards of what war movies are supposed to be in terms of realism and presentation. But it's still not quite top 10. So which movies are top 10? Well, here we go. Number 10 is Tank Girl. This movie came out in the mid-90s, and if I had to really describe it, what it does is it takes the basic ideas of Mad Max, which was an interesting but really shitty movie, and then it makes it good. It gives it a comprehensible plot that uses words and expression. It has good dialogue, it has universe building, it has a sense of humor, and a likable protagonist. So all of the things that Mad Max failed to provide. This is a great light-hearted romp that is absolutely perfect for social gatherings. If you just have a random group of people over, one movie that you can pretty much always put on that people will respond to in some way and that they can follow without having to pay attention to too closely is Tank Girl. Another great thing about this movie, which makes it still relevant, is that it makes fun of Gen X and punk rock in a way that explains the strangeness of that generation and their weird-ass taste to younger generations who haven't dealt with as many Gen Xers. When I meet people who are younger than me who didn't grow up around Gen Xers, this is how I explain to them why these people are so fucked in the head with all of their lefty ideas. Number 9, Home Alone 2, Lost in New York. Imagine Home Alone, the movie about setting traps for burglars and defending what is rightfully yours, but then making it on a grander scale and upping the stakes and just basically improving everything a little bit. It takes it from being a near great movie to a great movie. If you had to watch just one Home Alone, without a doubt, it has to be Home Alone 2. Of course, that would never be a problem. You should watch both of them, but if you had to choose, Home Alone 2. If you can only watch one at a family Christmas gathering, Home Alone 2, no question. The best thing about this movie, the best scene, for me at least, is the scene where Kevin throws bricks at the two burglars. We've been really conditioned to expect him to use elaborate traps to see him set all this shit up, and then he spends like 2.5 minutes just throwing bricks at them as they stand down the sidewalk. It's just the best setup of all time for a joke, at least in a 90s movie. We also have Tim Curry as a fairly major character, I guess a minor character, but still one who shows up quite a bit. And we also have a cameo by Donald Trump. I'm not aware of any other movie that features both these guys, so that is pretty epic. Of course, you have to watch this movie in the US rather than in Canada, because in Canada they banned the Trump cameo from appearing on TV because, communism. Kevin's hotel pranks, like the one with the thing in the shower and then the house traps, are incredible, and you have to see them to believe them. I won't spoil them. But then again, most of you have probably seen this movie. It's pretty popular, and rightfully so. Number 8, The Phantom Menace, Star Wars Episode 1. This one, I'm sure, will get me a lot of hate in the comments section, but again, I'm thinking objectively, you are thinking subjectively. Now, I do happen to like this film subjectively, but I can defend it through objective means. This movie is superior in every way to the original trilogy, and also to all the other movies in the franchise, in many ways, at least from a storytelling perspective. The other two prequels improve upon The Phantom Menace in some other ways that we'll get into when we talk about best movies of the 2000s. The thing that this does so well is it tells an origin story for one of the largest franchises in movie history. This also really invented the idea of a prequel. Before this, there was no such thing as a prequel, but then George Lucas really invented the concept with Phantom Menace and proved that it could work. Of all of the Star Wars films to date, this one has the best story and the best universe building. This is the only film which explains the Force. We have pod racing, we have cool new designs for equipment, and of all of the Star Wars movies, this one by far inspired the most cool video games. The Phantom Menace had the most sophisticated CGI in all of film up to that point. That is quite an accomplishment. And unlike a lot of 90s movies that use CGI, the CGI here in Phantom Menace has held up beautifully, as has all of the CGI in the prequels. Now, there are critics of it, but again, they're people who don't really know anything. The Darth Maul fight, where he fights Qui-Gon and Obi-Wan, and also the Battle of Naboo in space and on land, those are epic, and those are really well done. Something that I don't think the original trilogy ever came close to touching. So, brilliant stuff here. Also, I have to say all of the stuff I just mentioned, way better than anything in the sequel trilogy as well. So this movie is literally 20 years ahead of its time, and if the sequels had been anywhere close to this level of quality, people would not be bitching about them right now. Number 7, Terminator 2, Judgment Day. In the last list, I put Terminator at number 5, but despite that, I don't know which of these is the better movie. It's a really, really hard call. Both of these are absolute classics. The sad thing about T2 is that it's the last truly great Arnold Schwarzenegger movie and performance. Now, he was pretty damn good in Batman and Robin, but not like this. He has all kinds of one-liners, and there's so many memorable moments. This was, in many ways, an honorary 80s movie, so it was sort of an 80s carryover that still fit the 90s because it was updated in a lot of ways. It's both action-packed and emotionally moving. It's sophisticated in the way it tells the story and talks about time travel, but also simple in the way that it delivers all of the message and the story. One thing that this movie did do, though, is because it got the pacing down so perfectly, this movie is still a great metric for action movies and also for practical effects. So if you wanted to make sure that your movie is worthy of being released, one thing to do would be to compare it to Terminator 2 and see if it holds up. That shouldn't be that high of a bar to clear since this movie is almost 30 years old, but surprisingly, almost no movies made clear that bar. So step it the hell up, people who make action movies. T2 should be your metric, and it's available. Go use it. There are a whole lot of fanboys of the original Die Hard and the third Die Hard with a Vengeance. They are, of course, looking at it nostalgically and not objectively. When you look at it objectively, neither Die Hard 1 or 3 is a truly great movie. They're both just very average. However, there is a great Die Hard movie from the 1990s, and that movie is Die Hard 2: Die Harder. This is objectively the best movie in the series. It has the most realistic plot, the most tension, and the most action of any of the Die Hard films, at least in the original 3. What it shows accurately is that pre-9/11 airports before the Patriot Act were insecure and ripe for just such a disaster. If we had modern security protocols, this movie could not have been made. Which I guess in a way is a shame because this movie is fucking great. Another thing about this movie is that it has some really great plot twist. Most Die Hard movies are very straightforward and you always know what's going on, but in this one there is a brilliant plot twist which really makes you rethink everything you thought you knew about the film. And because of that, it's not only a great action film, but it's also a great mystery film. Number 5 is the action drama comedy Face Off. This movie has Nicolas Cage and John Travolta truly unleashed with all of their respective talents. Both of them are allowed to go absolutely ham. The effects are great, and this thing is completely off the chain. The premise is amazing. I won't spoil it. Unlike the other movies, this one is one that a lot of people have not seen and really need to watch. The premise is brilliant. And it's also realistic because this is something that could be done with just slightly more advanced technology. It's also super surreal, though, a lot of the things that happen. So it's simultaneously believable and a little bit out there. And it's that mix of being plausible but not quite right that makes it perfect. It makes it the perfect escape that still exercises your brain. This movie is full of twists, turns, and suspense. The writing is sharp and smart, and it is easily the best action thriller of the 1990s. The 1990s was not quite as ripe when it came to action movies as the 80s, but it still had a pretty decent crop, and of those movies, Face Off is without a doubt the top dog. Number 4, Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles 3: Turtles in Time. This was the third live-action Turtles movie of the 1990s, and it was by far the best. A lot of people are of the opinion the first two movies were better, but again, they're thinking of nostalgia and not thinking objectively. A lot of their reason for picking the first two is that those two movies are more based in the comic and cartoon. They're not looking at the film for its objective quality or how translatable it would be to a first-time watcher. Turtles 3: Turtles in Time, however, is something which improves upon the first two in every way and also has a story that you don't need to be a comic book fan to appreciate. The first two movies do look good, but the third movie simply looks better. The turtle designs have been vastly improved. The soundtrack is better. This one features a wider song variety. It even begins with a montage of a ZZ Top deep track. One that was well chosen, fits the scene brilliantly. So just the execution in this one was really good, unlike the other two which have parts that kind of drag a little bit. Not only is this movie not bound to the comics, but it also has an original story with an imaginative premise. Like a lot of really good movies, it features time travel and does it in a way that's consistent, plausible, and believable. Of all of the Turtles movies, including the ones that have been made since, this one is the best, And it also doubles as a top-notch period piece. I won't spoil it, but the Turtles do travel back in time to another time and place. You'll have to watch the movie for yourself to figure out what time and place that would be. The jokes in this one are all spot on. This is one of the best 90s comedies, and it builds effectively on earlier movies that were less good. A lot of the jokes are repeated, but done better. The jokes the first time were enough to make you smile a bit, and this one you'll be laughing out loud the whole time. Another thing that really makes Turtles 3 Turtles in Time stand out is that the fight choreography is excellent. There's a good mix of humor and action. It's believable, but also funny. Everything works, everything fits, and if you had to watch just one Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles movie or introduce this series to a person who's never seen any of it before, this is the introductory point, because this is the thing that will hook someone and make them a Turtles fan for life. Number 3, Billy Madison. For those of you who are fans of comedy, this one comes as no surprise. This is Adam Sandler's best movie of the decade, and also the best comedy of the 1990s. Of all of the movies from this period, this one probably has the most jokes which get repeated on a regular basis. If people only remembered one Sandler film, it would without a doubt be this one. If you had to ask somebody what really typifies comedy from the 1990s, it would be Billy Madison. Everything in this movie works. As someone who was actually in elementary school in 1995, I can tell you that this movie perfectly captures what it was like to be in elementary school at this time. This is something that was relatable to kids and adults. Everyone loved this movie. And it's one of those you can watch today, and it's smart enough and well written enough that it still works just as well as it did back in the 90s. For example, Veronica Vaughn. So hot, want to touch the hiney. The second best movie of the 1990s is Independence Day. This movie is a science fiction masterpiece. It is basically like Red Dawn, but with aliens and better. The cast and characters are excellent. You have all good actors and all good lines. All the action scenes are really well done, especially the dog fights. The vehicle designs for the aliens are also really good. The only thing that sort of takes this down objectively, although subjectively it doesn't, is the fact that the fighter plane that the Americans use throughout the movie is the shitty F-18 Hornet. Had they put a better fighter aircraft like the F-14 or F-16 Eagle or something like that, then this movie would have been better. But as it is, still very good. I'd have to say this is Will Smith's best movie, and while there has been a sequel, this is one that deserved a lot of sequels. If Independence Day came out literally every year during the summer, I would go to see it on opening night every single year. This franchise has amazing potential, and this movie did so much world building. We learned so much about the aliens that we need to know more, but that we know enough to know that there's a lot to be known. So it's one where there's a whole lot of potential that could have been fulfilled, and the fact that there haven't been about 8 or 10 Independence Day films just shows the stupidity of whatever studio made this. They didn't know that they were sitting on a gold mine, and they missed a golden opportunity. It's also a real tragedy to people who enjoy good movies, because I have no doubt that Independence Day has such a rich universe that there's no way that anyone can fuck it up. It's just not doable. And although I am trying to be as objective as possible in this video, I do have to say that subjectively, this is probably my favorite movie as a kid, Independence Day. Just fucking amazing. Number 1, Conan the Conqueror. I think that my selection of this movie proves beyond any shadow of a doubt that my criteria are both objective and completely effective. If I made this movie list subjectively, then Independence Day would have been an easy number 1. However, watching Conan the Conqueror for the first time, I have to admit that this movie absolutely blows away even Independence Day. In terms of objective quality, this is one of the best movies ever made. Now, this movie started out as something that should have been kind of generic and a little bit boring. It started out as the third Conan movie. What they wanted to do was to take an aging Arnold Schwarzenegger, put him in the Conan outfit one last time, and have him found a kingdom or something like that. But Arnold didn't want to do it, so this ended up evolving into a different and vastly superior product, with a much more compelling lead actor in Kevin Sorbo. At this time, Kevin Sorbo was at his peak. He was playing Hercules on TV, one of the best shows of the entire decade and of all time. And this show even managed to blow away Hercules. It was Sorbo's best role and his best performance. This is what should have kept him as a star to this day. The only reason that Sorbo's not more famous and that people aren't still casting him is because they clearly haven't seen what he's capable of with Conan the Conqueror. This is the best barbarian-themed fantasy movie of all time. Hands down. Not a contest. This is something that also should have started the franchise with a whole lot more movies. They should have just taken the material from the older Conan movies and reworked it to fit Conan the Conqueror, because the character of Conan the Conqueror was a million times better than Conan. So if you liked Conan, and those were okay movies, they were held back though by a lot of things like crappy effects and bad choreography. But Conan the Conqueror takes all the things that those had and really just takes them to the next level and makes them infinitely better and smarter. So, that is my list of the top 10 1990s films. This has been Remarkable Republican, bringing the truth with a truth-flavored bias, signing out.